You're listening to The Jacob Valk Show. He's breaking down the latest and greatest in sports as only he can. Follow him on Twitter at RealJacobValk. Here he is, Jacob Valk.
Welcome to another edition of the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk. And at the end of this show, you're going to get the interview that I did with John Robertson, the author of the book about the 1969-70 NHL season. It was a very, very fun conversation. But I have to start with baseball. And the Alex Cobb trade is finally official. We know all the details of this trade. He is going to the Angels. He's due $15 million this year. The Orioles are paying $10 million of that salary. The Angels are paying $5 million. And in exchange for all that, the Angels traded Jahmai Jones. This is a great trade for the Orioles. The reality is, Alex Cobb just isn't that good. I mean, when Cobb was with the Rays, he was really good. Put together some really good seasons. Another success story for the Rays in terms of how they develop pitchers. Then he signed a big contract with the Orioles, 4 years, $57 million. Give him credit. He got his big boy contract. No one begrudged him for signing that deal. The thing is, though, in his 3 years in Baltimore, he has been a complete disaster. He's never finished with a winning record. He's never had an ERA below 4.3. These are his seasons. 2018, 5-15, 4.9 ERA. 2019, 0-2 with a 10.95 ERA. He only pitched in 3 games that year. Last year, 2-5 with a 4.3 ERA. Yeah, that's worth over $14 million a year. It made sense for the Orioles to go after him. I'm not begrudging them for that. But in hindsight, that was a disastrous contract. So here are the Angels. They've made some big moves this offseason. Signing Kurt Suzuki, trading for Jose Iglesias, trading for Raisel Iglesias. They seem to be making a playoff push. Good for them. Did they need to upgrade their rotation? The answer is no. It wouldn't have killed them to, but it wasn't a burning need. Andrew Heaney's not a bad lefty. Dylan Bundy and Griffin Canning are talented pitchers. Patrick Sandoval and Jaime Barria are good youngsters. And you have Shohei Ohtani as the wild card. I understand that that rotation doesn't strike fear into you. It's not a bad rotation, but it's not a great rotation. Because while Bundy does have talent, last year was really his only really good season. Sandoval was a top prospect once upon a time. He hasn't shown it yet. I don't begrudge Perry Manassian for wanting to upgrade his rotation. What I do begrudge him for is thinking that Alex Cobb is that big an upgrade that he'd trade Jahmai Jones for him. I've already established that Alex Cobb isn't a good pitcher. And I don't see him reverting back to the pitcher that he was with the Rays. I understand that the Angels did this last year with Dylan Bundy. They brought in a former Oriole and they turned him around. But Bundy has better stuff than Cobb. Alright, I saw Bundy a lot. And I saw Cobb a lot, I'm telling you. Bundy's the better pitcher. The stats may not show it, but Bundy is better. So to add a pitcher who's probably the 5 starter for you in exchange for a pretty good prospect in Jahmai Jones, I don't understand that logic for the Angels. The Angels have a glaring hole at second base. Their second baseman on opening day, if it was tomorrow, would probably be Franklin Barreto. Franklin Barreto isn't that good. In fact, he stinks. You know who just so happens to play second base? Jahmai Jones. I mean, it's possible that their plan is to put David Fletcher at second base and Barreto becomes the utility infielder. I don't mind that. I actually like Fletcher. I think he's a really good player. But I'd rather give Jones a shot. There was a point in time where Jahmai Jones was one of the 100 best prospects in baseball. Then what happened was the Angels tinkered with his swing. They tried to improve his launch angle. It was a complete disaster. I mean, you gotta wonder what genius thought that was a good idea. We have this player who's swinging the bat really well. He's one of the 100 best prospects in baseball. We need to fix his swing. We need to try to improve his launch angle. It's a joke. In some cases, does it make sense to tinker with a guy's swing? Absolutely. No question. But in the case of Jones, what you did almost caused irreparable harm to him. You finally let him go back to his old swing, and he started to produce. I mean, this guy's just a pure contact hitter. He's a singles and doubles hitter. Really good speed. Super athletic. Controls the zone. Has a great attitude. Took the changes to his swing in stride, even when it was clear to everyone that they weren't working. I understand it's a limited sample size, but last year for the Angels, Jones was 3 for 7. The guy does have talent. Look, I'll say this. I understand that the Angels have a logjam in the middle infield. They traded for Iglesias. They have David it makes sense for them to be open to trading Jones. Jones isn't at the Joe Adele level. He's not untouchable. So if you wanted to add another reliever or even another starter, okay, I'm not against that premise. But to trade Jones for a below-average pitcher in Alex Cobb, that's a terrible job by the Angels. The Orioles easily win this trade. Jones is probably going to be an opening day starter for the Orioles. From third to first, it's probably going to be Hanser Alberto, Freddie Galvis, Jones, and Renato Nunez. That's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. This is a much better trade for the Orioles than it is the Angels. It's not even close. Moving on now to the Twins, bringing back Nelson Cruz for 1 year at $13 million. And the Twins had to bring Cruz back. Beloved figure in Minnesota, has had 2 great seasons for him. Integral part of their power-heavy lineup. It was kind of interesting to see National League teams linked to Cruz. But then when it came out that we're not going to get a universal DH for this year, which we absolutely should have, it should be universal one way or the other. In a perfect world, in my opinion, there wouldn't be a DH. I think having the pitcher bat adds an element of strategy to a game that really, really needs it. I mean, as it stands right now, the only strategy that a manager needs to have is when does he go to his bullpen? That's it. That's all the strategy you need to employ as a major league manager. In a perfect world, I would add to that. But it's never going to happen. We will have a universal DH at some point, and I can live with it. It should be universal one way or the other, though. There's no question about that. But with the National League not getting a universal DH for this coming season, Cruz really had no choice but to go back to the Twins. $13 million is more than fair for him. Like I said, this guy has put together 2 great seasons for the Twins. In 2019, he hit .311 with 41 homers and 108 RBIs. He finished 9th in MVP voting, won a Silver Slugger. And last year, he hit .303 with 16 homers and 33 RBIs. He also led the American League in intentional walks with 5. He finished 6th in MVP voting, won a Silver Slugger. Something tells me Cruz is gonna retire as a Twin. Maybe he could sign a one-day contract with the Rangers, but I wouldn't bet the rent on it because he's so beloved in Minnesota, and I know he loves playing there. This is a match made in heaven. It makes perfect sense for both parties. Moving on now to the Rays, bringing back an old friend. Chris Archer is back in Tampa. He signed a 1-year deal worth $6.5 million to go back to the Rays. Mark, if you're listening, I hope you like nostalgia. Let me tell you something about Chris Archer. This guy's first 3 full seasons in the majors. He was one of the best young pitchers in baseball. There's no question about that. Made an all-star team in 2015, got Cy Young votes. He looked really good. Then, in 2016, he fell off a cliff. He went 9-19 with a 4.02 ERA. The 19 losses led the majors. I know we're living in an era where wins and losses are devalued. I disagree with that strongly, but I understand I'm in the minority. But even with that being said, I think we can all agree that if you're the ace of the staff, you shouldn't go 9-19. That is inexcusable. I know that team was dreadful. The 2016 Rays went 68-94. They were a disaster. I get that. But look at a guy like Jacob deGrom, who's pitched for a bunch of bad Mets teams. He never finished with anywhere close to 19 losses. And this guy's the ace of the staff? Oh, come on, that's a joke. Even after that, he's still being talked up as one of the best pitchers in baseball. He's the ace of the staff. Don't worry, we can win with Chris Archer as our horse. No, you can't. In 2017, Archer went 10-12 with a 4.07 ERA. Somehow he made the All-Star team. I don't know how that happened. He led the majors in wild pitches with 15. I mean, this guy was being so overrated. It was honestly ticking me off. And then, in 2018, the unthinkable happened. Archer has a 3-5 record with the Rays, with a 4.31 ERA. By any metric you want to use, he's not a good pitcher. He's not an ace. Maybe he could be an innings eater. That's it. Archer gets traded. He gets sent to the Pirates. I remember I was getting ready for a 2-hour Beyond the Game. We were going to break down all the big MLB trades that happened at the 2018 trade deadline. So I hear that Archer gets traded. Great. What's the haul? I'm not thinking it's going to be anything huge, but it's still a noteworthy trade. Archer is a 2-time All-Star. He gets traded for Tyler Glasnow, Austin Meadows, and Shane Baz. Baz, the jury's still out on what he's going to do. He's 21 years old. He hasn't pitched above A-ball. You can't give up on him yet. Certainly some of his shine has been removed, but you can't give up on him. Glasnow and Meadows have turned into key contributors for the Rays. Last year, Glasnow was their second best starter. Last year, Meadows was bad, there's no question. But in 2019, he was an all-star. He had .291 with 33 homers and 89 RBIs. What did Archer do for the Pirates? I'm glad you asked. In 2018, he went 3-3 with a 4.3 ERA. In 2019, he went 3-9 with a 5.19 ERA. He didn't pitch at all in 2020. That trade will go down in baseball history as the worst trade that's been made since the Shelby Miller for Dansby Swanson trade. Have we had worse trades in the annals of baseball history? The answer is yes. I'm just talking in recent history. The Chris Archer trade has set the Pirates back a lot. They'd kill for Baz right now. They'd kill for Glasnow right now. They'd kill for Meadows right now. Instead, in Archer's 2.5 seasons with the Pirates, he went 6-12 with a 4.92 ERA. He's a fun-loving guy, seems like a nice guy, easy guy to get along with. But the reality is he's just not a good pitcher. Does it make sense for the Rays to bring him back? The answer is yes. You gave away Blake Snell. You've got to give the fans something to be happy about, all two of them. And they'll like seeing Archer back in Tampa. $6.5 million is fine for him. I don't mind it. If I'm looking at this in a bubble, it makes sense. But it's very hard for me to separate the fact that for a while, this guy was really overrated, and because of him, the Rays got an ace in Glasnow, a future starter in Baz, assuming he pans out, and an all-star outfielder in Austin Meadows. Let those guys torture the NL Central. I don't want to deal with them in the AL East. This move makes sense for the Rays. And make no mistake about it, the Archer trade is a big reason why Neil Huntington was fired as Pirates GM. Moving on now to the Brewers signing Colton Wong to a 2-year deal worth $18 million. It does have a team option for a third season worth $8 million. And this is a great move for the Brewers. Firstly, they stole him away from a division rival. So you made one of your main competitors a lot weaker. I'll get into the Cardinals' end of things in a minute. But the Brewers did have a hole at second base. Keston Hiura in 2019 burst onto the scene, had a great rookie season. Hit .303 with 19 homers and 49 RBIs. Then, his sophomore season, he hit .212 with 13 homers and 32 RBIs. He led the National League in strikeouts with 85. Do I like Hiura? The answer is yes. If the Brewers wanted to go into this coming season with Keston Hiura as their starting second baseman, I would have had no problem with that. But it is a reasonable question. Who is the real Keston Hiura? It's not enough to say last year was a joke of a season, so we can write that off. No, for these younger players that really haven't established themselves yet, that doesn't work. I mean, it's kind of interesting that the Brewers are willing to move on from him so quickly unless the plan is to move him to a different position. Good luck with that. He's never played another position besides second base. Wong has limited outfield experience. He's played a total of 19 games in the outfield in his professional career. 16 in the majors, 3 in the minors. I mean, it did make sense to add an outfielder if you're the Brewers. You have Yelich, you have Lorenzo Cain, and then you don't have anyone else. You really can't trust Avisail Garcia 100%. Ryan Braun and Ben Gamel are free agents. I get wanting to add an outfielder, but is Colton Wong the guy you want to add? The guy has virtually no outfield experience. To give him a 2-year deal worth $18 million? It's risky. It can work. It makes sense to add a player like Wong. He's a good player. He hit .265 last year. The year before, he hit .285. I mean, Wong is a great fielding second baseman. He's won 2 straight Gold Gloves. So if you're a great fielder, maybe the thinking is it'll be easier for him to pick up another position, but then the counter is he's proven himself at second base. Why do we want to move him? It's a questionable positional fit, but in terms of just adding talent in this coronavirus climate, taking a really good player away from your division rival makes sense. I mean, I'll say this, it's going to be very interesting to see what the Cardinals do now for a second baseman. Do they move Matt Carpenter there? I hope not. Do they move Tommy Edman there? That would make sense. This does open up a pretty big hole for the Cardinals. Wong was a reliable player for him. I thought they were going to bring him back. I was wrong. I'll say this, they better bring back Yadier Molina. This does hurt the Cardinals. There's no question. I mean, if the plan is to have Edman start, that's okay. But then you have a really weak bench. And again, in this coronavirus climate, depth is more important than it's ever been. This does hurt the Cardinals. It doesn't kill them, but it does hurt them. All in all, good move by the Brewers. The contract is fair. The positional fit is questionable. But if the plan is to put him in the outfield, I think he could do it. He does have the athleticism to play the outfield. He has a little bit of experience there. In theory, it can work. And the Cardinals do lose something in seeing him go to a division rival. But they do have Tommy Edman. This hurts their depth, but it doesn't hurt their starting lineup a lot. Moving on now to the Reds, signing Sean Doolittle to a 1-year deal worth $1.5 million. And this makes perfect sense for the Reds. Doolittle suffered in last year's farce of a season, went 0-2 with a 5.87 ERA. But excluding that year, He's never had an ERA above 4.1. In 2019, he went 6-5 with a 4.05 ERA. He had 29 saves. He led the National League in games finished with 55. You'd like the ERA to be lower as a closer. But I don't see Doolittle closing for the Reds. I think that's going to be Amir Garrett. The Reds did need to add a lefty to their bullpen. They do have a solid bullpen. Garrett, Lucas Sims, Tejay Antone, Michael Lorenzen, and now Doolittle. That's a solid bullpen. It's not great, but it's not bad. This move makes perfect sense. $1.5 million for Doolittle is an absolute steal. Great job by the Reds. Moving on now to the Cubs, signing Andrew Chafin to a 1-year deal worth $2.75 million. This deal does have a mutual option for 2022 at a $5.25 million value. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Cubs ended up exercising their end of that mutual option. Chafin is an underrated lefty reliever. He's a good lefty reliever. Last year he went 1-2 with a 6.52 ERA. I get that. Bad year, no question. 2019, he went 2-2 with a 3.76 ERA. The year before that, 1-6 with a 3.1 ERA. The year before that, 1-0 with a 3.51 ERA. Chafin has a ton of talent. He's one of the most underrated lefty relievers in the game. Obvious statement of the year coming up. Last year's farce of a season made some really good players have bad years. Chafin was one of them. I truly think he's gonna round back into form, and he'll be a really good lefty in a Cubs bullpen that could stand to add a lefty. Their best relievers are all righties. You need a lefty to balance that out. This is a good move for the Cubs. They're banking on a lot of talented guys having bounce-back years, and I think that's a good strategy. These are talented guys that got messed up because they didn't have a proper spring training. They weren't properly conditioned. You know what? It's very easy for me to think that they're going to rebound this coming season. I'm not saying the Cubs are going to make the playoffs or anything. The Cardinals are winning the Central. But I don't think the Cubs will be terrible. Moving on now to the Phillies, signing Chase Anderson to a 1-year deal worth $4 million. And this isn't an awful move by the Phillies. And there's no question that the Phillies needed to address the back end of their rotation. After Nola, Wheeler, and Eflin, their rotation falls off a cliff. Obviously, they brought in Matt Moore, but he's no sure thing. Spencer Howard is a top prospect, but you know what? Last year, he didn't pitch well. The Phillies did need to add rotation depth. Anderson does have some talent. He's not great. He's not terrible. He's a 4 or 5 starter. In 2019, he went 8-4 with a 4.21 ERA. Last year, he went 1-2 with a 7.22 ERA. It wouldn't surprise me if he bounced back to 2019 form. There are certainly worse pitchers in baseball than Chase Anderson. $4 million is more than fair for him, and I'll say this. A rotation of Nola, Wheeler, Eflin, Anderson, and Howard, assuming all those guys pitch at the level that they're capable of pitching at, that could be a good rotation. In fact, that could be a really good rotation. The Phillies could surprise some teams next year. They've just got to get their bullpen situated. Alright, now I'll give you some college basketball Valk talk. And I gotta start with Baylor, Texas. You remember how yesterday I said that Baylor is the better team than Texas? Believe it or not, I actually know a little bit about sports. From the get-go, the Bears look like the better team. Whenever the Longhorns made the game close, the Bears had an answer for them. They just kept pulling away. Texas got closer, Baylor pulled away. Texas got closer, Baylor pulled away. I mean, this was a really well-rounded game by Baylor. You've got Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler both scoring over 20 points. Mitchell with 27, Butler with 21. But like I said, they got contributions up and down the lineup. Masio Teague had 10 points. Mark Vidal had 6 points. Adam Flagler had 8 points. Matthew Mayer had 7 points. I mean, I told you yesterday that they were a well-rounded team. They are. Whatever team goes up against them, regardless of when, regardless of where, they're going to have a tough time beating Baylor. They can beat you in so many different ways. A lot of people are picking them to win March Madness. I can't say I blame them. As for Texas, they played a good game. They just had the misfortune of going up against a great Baylor team. I mean, the thing that's going to drive Shaka Smart nuts is that the Longhorns were atrocious from the charity stripe. They only hit 3 out of their 14 free throws. But they were still in this game for the most part. This game was closer than the final score would indicate. Andrew Jones had 25 points. Matt Coleman had 13. Courtney Ramey had 12. Jericho Sims nearly had a double-double. 10 points, 9 rebounds. If Texas was playing a lesser team, they would have won yesterday. They just had the misfortune of going up against a team that, at this very moment, is probably the favorite to win March Madness. Alright, now we'll talk about the upsets that happened yesterday. And I'll start with Purdue, Maryland. A game that Purdue should have won. Even though Sasha Stefanovic has the coronavirus, Maryland really isn't a good team this year. Entering yesterday's game, they were 9-8. Purdue was 12-6. This was a game that Purdue should have won comfortably. I don't care that it's in College Park. But the absence of Stefanovic really hurt Purdue. They shot just 4 for 17 from beyond the arc. If Stefanovic was there, that wouldn't have happened. I mean, look, in this season, you're going to have to deal with players being out a lot. You need guys to pick up the slack. The only guys who did were Travion Williams, who was fantastic yesterday, the best player for either team, and Jaden Ivey, who had 14 points. But guys like Mason Gillis, Brandon Newman, Eric Hunter, Isaiah Thompson, etc., they all laid an egg. And give Maryland credit for seizing upon that. Purdue had a chance to win this game late. They were up 5 with a $1:43 on the clock. Then Darryl Morsell hit a 3-pointer. Jaden Ivey missed a 3-pointer. Eric Ayala had 4 free throw tries. He made 3 of them. Jaden Ivey missed another big shot. And Maryland pulled it out. Give Ayala credit. He came in clutch. He's a good player. I like him. This is a tough loss for Purdue. Like I said, it's a game they should have won. I don't care that it's on the road. I don't care that they were without Stefanovic. Maryland really isn't that great this year. In college basketball, there are such things as excusable losses. Texas losing to Baylor is an excusable loss. Purdue losing to Maryland isn't an excusable loss. Moving on now to Tennessee Ole Miss. By far and away the biggest upset yesterday. But what wasn't an upset is how low scoring this was. You may not know it by the record, but Ole Miss is a really good defensive team. They've only given up 62.2 points per game. That's the 22nd best mark in the nation. The thing is, though, besides Devontae Shuler, they just don't have a scorer. But you've got to give Romello White credit. He stepped up against a really good Volunteers defense and dropped 14. That was really all Ole Miss needed. They held the Volunteers to just 36% shooting, 42% from beyond the arc. I was a little surprised that Rick Barnes didn't go with a more perimeter-heavy offense. That was really the only way that they were scoring sorta kinda consistently. But at the end of the day, their best three-point shooter, Santiago Vescovi, only shot 1 for 4 from beyond the arc. The high man for Tennessee yesterday was Yves Pons. He only had 13 points. That's not going to get the job done. I mean, Tennessee really should have won this game. They have a great defense too. They should have been able to clamp down on guys like White, Jarkel Joyner, and Luis Rodriguez. But they really didn't. They allowed them to contribute. The biggest takeaway that the Volunteers need to have from this game is how how do we beat great defenses? Because Ole Miss has a great defense. And you know what? If a guy like White or Joyner really get going, along with Devontae Shuler, it wouldn't stun me if Ole Miss went on a big run. They've got some competition, there's no question, but they have the defense necessary to win games. If Tennessee wants to go on a big run next month, they're going to need to beat these great defenses. They're going to need guys like Pons and Springer and Vescovi and Fulkerson and Bailey to show up. It's just that simple. When the lights are on bright, you need your best players to step up. I do want to talk about a really sad death in the baseball world, and that is the passing of Grant Jackson, who died yesterday at the age of 78 from complications that arose from him having the coronavirus. In the 70s, Jackson was a really, really good reliever. And this was an era when the bullpen really started to gain some importance. You had the Trailblazers, guys like Phil Regan, Ron Peronoski, Luis Arroyo, Mo Drabowski, etc., in the 60s. Then in the 70s, a new crop of relievers came in. Guys like Raleigh Fingers, Sparky Lyle, Goose Gossage. But all those guys were closers. Naturally, you need a guy that's going to get the ball to your closer. You're not going to be able to throw the starter out there for 7-8 innings every game. So you saw setup guys become really important. Guys like Pedro Borbon, Elias Sosa, Charlie Huff, Dale Murray, etc. I mean, I could go on and on. Grant Jackson was right there. He was one of the best setup guys of the 1970s. His rookie season came in 1967 for the Phillies. He pitched well out of the bullpen that year, went 2-3 with a 3.84 ERA. The year after that, he went 1-6 with a 2.95 ERA. Then the Phillies moved him into the rotation. In 69, he made his only All-Star team, went 14-18 with a 3.34 ERA. He threw 13 complete games that year. After that, he had a really bad season. The Phillies hired a manager named Frank Lucchese. And him and Jackson didn't get along. Jackson had a bad year, went 5-15 with a 5.29 ERA. So in that offseason, he was traded to the Orioles. The Orioles didn't need a starter. They had Jim Palmer, Dave McNally, Mike Cuellar, Pat Dobson, one of the best rotations of all time. They put Jackson back into the bullpen. And like I said, Jackson turned into one of the best setup guys in baseball. With the Orioles, he went 24-12 with a 2.81 ERA. He pitched in 4 playoff games for the Orioles, didn't allow a single earned run, went 1-0. The guy was a really good reliever. In fact, some years he was the primary closer for the Orioles. We talk about guys today who can't close, they can only set up. And we talk about guys who can't set up, they can only close. Jackson could do both. In 1976, Jackson was part of a big trade. I'm not talking big in the sense of, these are superstars being traded. I'm talking about big in the sense of number of people in the deal. Jackson was traded from the Orioles to the Yankees in a 10-player trade. He, along with Doyle Alexander, Jimmy Freeman, Elrod Hendricks, and Ken Holtzman, were sent to the Yankees for Rick Dempsey, Tippy Martinez, Rudy May, Scott McGregor, and Dave Pagan. If you were a Yankees fan in the 70s, you remember that trade vividly. In the regular season for the Yankees, Jackson pitched really well. Went 6-0 with a 1.69 ERA. The Yankees had 3 really good relievers entering the 76 postseason. Lyle, Dick Tidrow, and Jackson. Unfortunately for Jackson, he just couldn't pitch under the bright lights in the Bronx. He appeared in 3 games in the postseason, 2 ALCS games, and 1 World Series game. Every game he appeared in, he gave up at least 1 run. In fact, Game 5 of the 76 ALCS, the Chris Chambliss game, Jackson was called upon to preserve a 3-run lead in the top of the 8th, and he couldn't do it. He allowed a single to Jim Wolford, who had pinch hit for Tom Poquette. Then George Brett hit a 3-run home run to tie the game at 6. For whatever it's worth, before Jackson came in, Ed Figueroa, the Yankees starter, came out to start the 8th inning. He allowed a leadoff single to Al Cowens. Jackson then made his way to the Pittsburgh Pirates. With the Pirates, he continued being an excellent setup guy. Really good at getting the ball to Kent Tekulve. Very, very underrated closer. In 79, We Are Family by Sister Sledge was sweeping the nation. The Pittsburgh Pirates adopted that song. They became the We Are Family Pirates. They went on a big run that year. They won 98 games. They won the NL East. They swept the Reds in the NLCS. And they beat the Orioles in 7 games to win the World Series. Jackson was an excellent playoff pitcher that year for the Pirates. Didn't give up a single run. got the win in Game 1 of the NLCS. A 5-2 Pirates win in 11 innings. And his magnum opus was pitching 2 2/3 innings of shutout baseball in Game 7 of the World Series to get the win. Jackson got the win, McGregor got the loss, Tekulve got the save, the Pirates got the World Series rings. In his Pirates career, he went 29-19 with a 3.23 ERA. He was a beloved figure in the Pittsburgh area. Extremely underrated part of that World Series winning team. Extremely underrated pitcher. May he rest in peace. Alright, here's my interview with John Robertson. You're listening to the Jacob Valk Show. I am Jacob Valk, and I'm fortunate enough to be joined by John Robertson, the author of Hockey's Wildest Season, The Changing of the Guard in the NHL, 1969 to 1970. John, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you today?
I'm doing good. So, I'm going to start this interview off by paraphrasing one of the best movies of all time, Casablanca.
Okay.
Of all the seasons in all of hockey in all the world, why'd you write about the 69-70 NHL season?
Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, I was born in 1964, and I mentioned in the preface to my book that I started collecting hockey cards at the age of 3, but when I was 6, that's the first real solid memories I have of following NHL hockey. That was the 1969-70 season, because those games I was first watching on TV. They were afternoon games that were televised on Sunday, so that allowed me to watch the full game without interrupting my bedtime, and they must have made a big impression on me. So in looking back at that season over the years, I was thinking, what a great season it was. There were so many interesting aspects to it. There was a complete changing of the guard in the NHL, as the title of the book indicates, and it had a lot of iconic moments, too.
Okay, all right. Look, it makes sense to me to write about it. I just like paraphrasing Humphrey Bogart.
That's probably my favorite movie, too, so go right ahead. Yeah.
So, an extremely important moment of the season actually happened before it got officially underway. What can you tell us about Wayne Mackey, or Mackey, not sure how you pronounced it, nearly killing Ted Green?
Yes, it's actually pronounced Mackey.
Hey, I was right.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, he had a brother, Chico Mackey, who played for the Chicago Blackhawks for many, many years.
Okay.
So anyway, Wayne Mackey was a journeyman player who was signed by the St. Louis Blues. He had spent most of the previous year playing minor league hockey, so he was trying to work his way into the Blues NHL lineup. And in September of 1969, the Blues and the Boston Bruins were playing an exhibition game in Ottawa. And in the first period of the game, if I'm not mistaken, there was an incident between Mackey and Ted Green of the Bruins. Now, Green was a tough customer. He was the Bruins' basically enforcer. He was a good player, but he was a tough customer. He didn't want to mess around with him. And people are still debating about what actually happened. There's a thought that Mackey speared Green. Anyway, they were in a corner, and an altercation broke out, and it ended up being a stick-swinging incident. And as Green was skating away from Mackey literally clubbed him over the head with his stick, hitting him on the skull with the hardest part of the stick where the blade meets the shaft. And Green collapsed, and he muttered a few words and then tried to get up and then lost consciousness. And it was touch and go for a while, and Green nearly died. And that sparked a whole big argument in the NHL about mandatory helmet use, because neither Green nor Mackey wore helmets, nor did 95% of NHL players. And it also sparked the problem about on-ice violence, stick swinging. And Mackey, his career almost stopped there. He played a handful of games. He didn't play any NHL games that year. He played a few with the Vancouver Canucks the next year, but his career never went anywhere. Green lost the entire season in 69-70, and he came back the next year with a helmet. He played with a helmet for the rest of his career. He hated wearing one. And Green just died about a year ago. But it was sort of one of these incidents that really, that's a bad start to the season. But luckily for the NHL and hockey overall, the season got better after that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when I think of hockey sticks being swung, I think of Marty McSorley clocking Donald Brashear with the stick. Was it similar to that, what Mackey did to Green? Do I have that right?
Yeah, I would say it was worse from the description.
It was worse.
It was worse. It was like it was almost like this was like a severe clubbing motion with and it fractured Green's skull. The McSorley incident was almost more of a slash. This in 1969 was almost a clubbing incident, and it's there's no known film of it. Rumor has it one of the Boston TV stations that covered the game has it in its archives but won't show it. But to my knowledge, there's no official video of it, and maybe that's just as well.
Yeah, that's not the kind of thing you want to see more than once. So while we're on the subject of the Bruins, can you lay out Bobby Orr's 69-70 regular season?
I'd be glad to. It's remarkable. You have to remember at the time that defensemen were thought to be on the ice to play defense. Orr was the best defenseman in the NHL. He was also the best offensive player in the NHL. He ended up winning the scoring title with 120 points, which was he was the only player in the NHL to get three figures in scoring that year. Second place was Phil Esposito, I think, who got 99 points. And so a defenseman winning the scoring title would be the same as a pitcher winning a batting title in Major League Baseball. It was unheard of. Orr dominated the game like nobody else. Nobody had ever seen anyone kill penalties like Orr. No one had ever seen anyone dominate the game from the blue line, rushing the puck. Other teams tried to contain him. Most famously, Scotty Bowman, when he was coaching St. Louis, tried to contain Orr for the first game and a half of the Stanley Cup Finals and failed miserably because all the other Bruins were left unguarded. And Johnny Busick, for example, got a hat trick in the first game of the Finals because the Blues were so focused on Orr. Orr was on the ice for 5 of the 6 goals the Bruins got that game. So Orr was just a dominant figure, and he became the face of the NHL. There's a picture I came across where showed someone employed by the Bruins sorting Orr's mail, and it was just like stacks and stacks and stacks of fan letters he was getting from all over the world. Now,
there's I don't want to say controversy, but it's the age-old debate. Who's the best player in NHL history? Some people will say Bobby Orr. I'm curious, where do you land in that debate?
I'm one of those people.
Okay.
I go by the argument that 5 Orrs would beat 5 Gretzkys and would beat 5 Howes, just because Orr was a complete player. He played offense, defense. He would kill penalties. You could put him on the power play. He would block shots. He was also a tough customer. A lot of people don't realize that Bobby Orr had more fighting majors than Gordie Howe, Wayne Gretzky, and Mario Lemieux combined.
Wow.
So he was a tough customer, and so if he needed to throw a body check, he would. Red Fisher, the great Montreal sports journalist, once said that when Orr came up as a rookie, as an 18-year-old in 1966, the rest of the league tested him. They didn't test him in the second season because Orr was a tough customer, and he showed it in his rookie year.
Yeah, I've actually met Bobby Orr, really nice guy. I have him third on my list. I have him behind Gretzky and Howe, but I don't begrudge anyone for putting Orr number 1, number 2. I don't begrudge you at all, John. That's quite all right.
Yeah, I have this argument with people all the time, so it's nothing new for me.
Yeah, no, I respect the argument. It's a valid premise to put Orr number 1. The guy did revolutionize the game. I mean, there's one clip I remember of Bobby Orr, and it's him starting out from behind the Bruins net. He brings the puck up himself, he scores, and then he just, nods his head down. He doesn't hug anyone. He doesn't celebrate like a maniac. He knows that he embarrassed the opposing team, and he just celebrated in a very subdued way. He's a class act all the way. Do you know that clip?
Yeah, now that could be one of two. There was one from the 1969-70 season where he does that against Detroit, and basically he doesn't even shoot the puck into the net. He just kind of guides it into the net. And there's another one from maybe about 5 years later where he's playing Atlanta, and he goes around the net, and half the Atlanta Flames are chasing him, including the goalie, and he still scores. So it could be either one of those, but I am familiar with most of the Bobby Orr highlight clips, yes.
Yeah, I think it's the first one.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's from 69-70. I remember Travis Hamonic, former Islander, scored a goal like that, and Don Cherry singled it out on Coach's Corner. I love grapes.
Yeah.
Talking to John Robertson, the author of Hockey's Wildest Season, The Changing of the Guard in the NHL, 1969 to 1970. So, would you be able to describe Tony Esposito's 69-70 season?
Certainly. Tony Esposito was actually originally a member of the Montreal Canadiens. A lot of people don't realize this. But he was made available, basically. The Hawks took him off waivers, basically, because the Canadiens were deep in goaltending. And as a rookie in 1969-70, he got 15 shutouts, and that's remarkable. The NHL record's 22 by George Hainsworth, but that was back in the 20s and the 30s that didn't have forward passing and stuff like that. So to me, Esposito holds the record for 15 shutouts in a year. And he basically was the main reason the Chicago Blackhawks were a force in 1969-70. The previous year, they had finished last, and they'd given up an incredibly bad number of goals in the year. Then they went, I believe in 69-70, they gave up the fewest goals in the NHL. Esposito played in the All-Star game as a rookie. That was almost unheard of. And Bobby Hull said it himself. He said, if it wasn't for Tony Esposito, we wouldn't even be in playoff contention. Esposito had a unique style. If people remember him, he came out he offered a spot between his legs to shoot the puck at, and then he would take it away. And he was very good, especially close in. Gump Worsley, who was still playing goal then, he said Esposito's weaknesses were actually on long shots, but because once you got in close to him, he was almost unbeatable. So, oddly enough, his greatest nemesis was Phil Esposito, his brother, who seemed to have no trouble scoring goals against him. The first game Tony Esposito ever played in the NHL he was still with Montreal, and they played Boston, and the game ended in a 2-2 tie, and Phil Esposito got both the goals.
Is that right? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Apparently, Phil and Tony's mother wasn't happy about that. So.
Well, Phil had a lot of practice shooting on Tony in those.
Yeah, and Tony actually credits Phil for making him a better goalie. Phil would tell him, to practice his glove hand, cut down the angles better. So Tony actually, in an interview I read from a 1969 Montreal Gazette article, credited Phil with helping him become a better goalie.
Great hockey family, the Espositos, right up there with the Souters, the Howes, you name it. The Espositos are up there. There's no question about that.
Mm-hmm.
So what can you tell us about the third iteration of the production line?
Oh, for the Detroit Red Wings. The Detroit Red Wings had an interesting line. The production line, which consisted of Gordie Howe, Alex Delvecchio, and Frank Mahovlich. When Frank Mahovlich had his birthday on January the 10th, which is my birthday, the combined age of that line was 111. So these guys were old, but they were still generally regarded as the most effective line in the NHL. They would routinely score most of the Red Wings' goals. And the Red Wings had a superb regular season. At one point, they had only lost 3 of 22 games, and they never lost more than 2 games in a row in the regular season. It was largely because of this one line of guys who were nearing the end of the line but just gelled together. Frank Mahovlich would go on to play, a few more years. And one quote I came across when he was winding things up with Birmingham and the WHA, a reporter asked him, well, how come your numbers aren't as good as they used to be? And he said, well, in Birmingham I don't have Gordie Howe and Alex Delvecchio was my name, which was as good an answer as you're going to get, I think, from Frank Mahovlich.
Yeah, no question about that. You can't replace line mates like that. There's no line today that comes anywhere close to the production line. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
The Bruins have a pretty good line right now with Bergeron and Marchand and Pasternak. But I would agree that
spoken like a true Bruins fan, John.
Yeah, spoken. Absolutely. But I would agree. I mean, for name recognition, those you're dealing with three Hall of Famers right there, like no doubt Hall of Famers. Delvecchio, Howe, and Mahovlich.
No questions.
Yeah.
So, can you lay out the dogfight between the Red Wings, Rangers, and Canadiens for the final two playoff spots in the East Division?
Okay, this is a little complicated, but I'll do my best. Of course, there were 12 teams in the NHL. There were two divisions of six. There was the East and the West. The East was comprised of the six original teams, and the top four made the playoffs. And going all season long, 5 of the teams were in contention. Toronto was the weak sister, so they were basically out of it by the 1st of March. But for the other 5 teams, they could finish anywhere from 1st to 5th. They were that tightly packed. And going into the last weekend, for example, Detroit and Montreal could both finish anywhere from 1st to 5th. And it came down to the last weekend of the season, which was April 4th and 5th. And the schedule maker did an interesting thing, which was not uncommon. He had teams play home and home Saturday and Sunday. So, for example, the last weekend, Boston was at Toronto on the Saturday. Toronto was at Boston on Sunday. The New York Rangers were at Detroit on Saturday, and then the Red Wings were at New York in Madison Square Garden on Sunday. Chicago was at the Montreal Forum Saturday. The Canadiens were at Chicago Stadium on Sunday. So the Bruins won both the games against Toronto and could finish no worse than second. On the Saturday night, Detroit beat New York, and it looked like New York was going to finish 5th and out of the playoffs. But Chicago beat Montreal at the Forum, which was a little surprising, which gave Chicago a guaranteed playoff spot. And so the crux of it all was that New York had to beat Detroit and score a lot of goals, while Montreal had to lose in Chicago on the last day in order for New York to make the playoffs and Montreal to miss it. By Detroit winning on the Saturday, they were guaranteed a playoff spot, and they figured they couldn't get any higher than 3rd, even though it was technically possible they could have finished 2nd. And they were playing the Rangers on a Sunday afternoon game on the CBS NHL Game of the Week. The Montreal-Chicago game was going to be a few hours later. So Emile Francis, the coach and general manager of the Rangers, did the arithmetic, and he said, well, we've got to win, first of all, to have any chance, and we have to score at least 5 goals, and I'd like to score 9. At the time, believe it or not, goal difference was not a tiebreaker in the playoffs. Goals for was. So giving up goals was not a big deal as long as you were winning the game.
You got to wonder who came up with that. That is a really stupid tiebreaker.
It was really stupid, and they didn't correct it completely in the NHL until 1994, believe it or not.
Oh, God.
So anyway, as Clarence Campbell said, well, our tiebreaker had never been tested. He was the president. And, well,
we don't know it's stupid because no one's gotten around to testing it.
Yeah. So anyway, Emile Francis, being one of the sharpest men in hockey, said, well, he actually told him, I think we need 9 goals. So what he did was he positioned his defenseman 10 feet in from the blue line, and he went for total offense. And what helped the Rangers was the Red Wings really didn't care. They had clinched the playoff spot the night before, and quite frankly, a lot of the players had celebrated too much. There's a rumor going around to this day that isn't true, that half the players didn't play, half the regulars. That's not true. Only a couple of Detroit players didn't play. Their one goalie, Roy Edwards, who was supposed to play, had imbibed in too much champagne on the plane on the way home, and Dale Rolfe was legitimately injured. All the rest of the Red Wings played, but not much. For example, Gordie Howe played only sparingly. Alex Delvecchio and Frank Mahovlich only played sparingly. And the Rangers at one point in the game were up 9-3, and they Emil Francis pulled Ed Giacomin from the Rangers net, even though they were up by 6 goals, to try to get more and more goals. It didn't work. Detroit got 2 back, made it 9-5. So anyway, the Rangers won 9-5. They got the 9 goals they wanted, and then they had to sit around and wait for the Montreal Canadiens to play the Chicago Blackhawks that night. And the Canadiens were watching the Rangers game and getting angrier and angrier and angrier, because now for every goal the Rangers scored, technically it made it harder for them to make the playoffs if they didn't win in Chicago. So for Montreal to make the playoffs, they either had to win, get a tie, or score 5 goals. And looking back at it, if the Canadiens had just went out completely for offense and just scored 5 goals, regardless whether they gave up 12 or not, it would have served them better. But instead, they kind of played cautiously. They got up to a 1-0 lead, but then fell behind 3-1. It was 3-2 at the end of the second for Chicago. And then Pitt Martin of the Blackhawks scored 2 goals to make it 5-2. And then with 8 minutes to go, Montreal had to score 3 goals to either tie the game or get 5 goals and make the playoffs. Well, so Claude Ruel, the coach of the Canadiens, pulled goalie Rogie Vachon with 8 minutes to go, and Chicago ended up scoring 5 empty net goals. And the game ended 10-2, and Montreal missed the playoffs on the basis of goals for, and it was the first time they missed the playoffs in 22 years, and it was the only time in 46 years they missed the playoffs. And that Sunday has gone down in New York Rangers lore as the 9-5 game. So if you ever talk to a Rangers fan and you mention the 9-5 game, they know exactly what you're talking about. It's the game that they beat the Red Wings 9-5, and the 9 goals got them into the playoffs.
And Yvan Cournoyer is still upset about it.
He was one of the more vocal critics. Like he blamed the Red Wings and openly said they had no class and no pride. A lot of the other, Claude Ruel at least said, well, it was within our grasp when we let it go. John Ferguson said, going to when the Canadiens were taking their bus from the hotel to the games, don't worry about what the Rangers did. All we have to do is win or tie or get 5 goals. It's totally within our grasp. And they let it slip away. Montreal had a terrible habit that year of blowing games in the last 3 or 4 minutes. But one writer figured they had lost points in 13 games in the last 5 minutes by either turning ties into losses or wins into ties. So Montreal got 92 points that year, and that set a record for most points without making the playoffs.
And just for whatever it's worth, going back to Rangers lore, 9-5, obviously important. The year after, very important, the Blackhawks beat the Rangers to get into the Stanley Cup in 7 games. That's one of my favorite moments in Rangers history because I hate the Rangers. I'm an Islanders fan.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, the Blackhawks the next year got moved from the East Division into the West Division when the NHL expanded by 2 teams. And it was a welcome move because the 6 expansion teams were put into one division, and they were clearly not at the level of the original 6 for the first 3 years. And by putting Chicago into the West Division the next year, it at least gave the West Division some prestige. And not surprisingly, Chicago finished first, and it got to the Stanley Cup Finals that year.
Yeah, let's think about this geographically for a minute. You've got Chicago in the West, you've got Philadelphia in the West, you've got Pittsburgh in the West, and you've got Vancouver in the East. How exactly does that make any sense?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. I mean, they shouldn't have called it East and West. They should have, named the divisions after somebody or called it Division A and B or something. But yeah, the 2 expansion teams that came in 70-71 were Buffalo and Vancouver, and they got slotted into the East Division and then moved Chicago into the West to give it 7 teams each. And Vancouver had a brutal schedule. They were in the air. The air miles they put on that year were just absolutely atrocious, and it didn't really change until the NHL went to a conference format in 74, 75. So.
Yeah, and then a couple of years after that, the Islanders came into existence, 72, 73.
Correct, yes.
Talking to John Robertson, the author of Hockey's Wildest Season, The Changing of the Guard in the NHL, 1969 to 1970. So let's stick with the Rangers for a little bit. Would you be able to describe the playoff series between the Bruins and Rangers?
Yes, it was mayhem. Phil Esposito later said that he had a hunch that whoever would win this quarterfinal series, first round, would win the Stanley Cup. And Boston won the first game 8-2, and just demolished the Rangers. And then everybody said, well, this is going to be a rout. And then Boston won the next game 4-1, I think it was. And so they were up 2-0. And they're going into Madison Square Garden for the next 2 games. And things got out of hand. Derek Sanderson, in his book, he said that he admits what he did was completely false. He told the newspaper people that Eddie Jackaman, the Rangers goalie, had told him that the Rangers had put a bounty on his head. And, it was like something out of pro wrestling or something like that. And anyway, the Rangers, with I think the first minute of Game 3 took about half an hour to play because there were like fights all over the place. And Sanderson got thrown out, and I forget, someone from the Rangers got thrown out too. I forget who it was. So anyway, the Rangers, with all these brawls going on, were in games that were setting all sorts of penalty records. The Rangers won the next 2 games. Ed Johnston played goal in Game 4 for Boston instead of Jerry Cheevers. Didn't do all that well. He got yanked and never played another game in the playoffs that year. The series went back to Boston for Game 5, and the Rangers were winning by a goal going into the third period. And then I think Esposito and Orr got a couple, and Boston won Game 5, and then Boston won Game 6 in Madison Square Garden to win the series. And when the bell rang, some of the fans were trying to set the mezzanine on fire at Madison Square Garden, and the Bruins were showered with ball bearings, rotten eggs, shaving cream cans. The stuff that was thrown at them was unbelievable. Johnny Busick, in his autobiography, said it was the worst display of sportsmanship he'd ever seen in his life. And,
you got to wonder how they got that through security.
What security?
Like, yeah, exactly. It's like shaving cream. What are you going to do, shave at intermission?
Yeah. I don't think they ever checked anyone's pockets in those days. So.
Now, let me ask you this. A few years after that, you have the famous moment, McNabb going into Madison Square Garden stands and beating up the fans. Terry O'Reilly, Mike Milbury beat someone with his own shoe. Do you think what happened in 69-70 was lingering in people's minds when that was happening?
No, not at all. You have to remember, I mean, Phil Esposito was playing for the Rangers by that point. I don't think it has any connection at all. I mean, the number of Bruins who were on the ice in 1979 who were there from 1969, you might have had, was it Wayne Cashman? I'm trying to think of anybody else who might have still been around. So, I think that's just a strange coincidence.
Okay. All right, I was just curious because it is an interesting clip. So the semifinals in 69-70 were mostly uneventful, so I'd like to move on to the Stanley Cup Finals.
Sure.
However, before we get there, I have a couple questions about that year's participants. Okay. Excluding Bobby Orr, since we already discussed him, how exactly did the Bruins dominate the rest of the NHL?
The Bruins were pretty good defensively. One of the things that's underestimated against the Bruins was their goaltending. That had always been a bit of a weakness. They probably should have done better in the previous 2 years' playoffs than they had, and the goaltending would let them down a little bit. But their defense improved, and their overall team play improved. The Bruins allowed less than 3 goals a game, which was pretty good for those days, and they scored an average of 3.5 a game. So they were doing enough to win every game. They were almost unbeatable at home on home ice, and they were certainly unbeatable when it came to playing the 6 teams from the West at home. Boston had trouble winning games on the road against their Eastern Division rivals, but they would just dominate the Western Division teams, and that's what made the difference and got them even into the playoffs. Harry Sinney did a good job coaching, and the Bruins are very, very well balanced. They only lost 2 games in a row once, and that was early in the season, and they were just a very consistently good team that would win and or get ties and would never fall into a slump. That's basically how they got there. And then when they got to the playoffs, they really gelled. They won 10 games in a row at one point.
Unreal. Absolutely unreal. And they had fantastic players, too. Obviously, Bobby Orr, but Esposito, John McKenzie, Johnny Busick, Fred Stanfield, Jerry Cheevers, Ken Hodge, Derek Sanderson, Eddie Westfall, Wayne Cashman. I could keep going on and on. It's one of the greatest teams in hockey history. Would you agree with that?
You pretty much hit most of the big names there. Very good.
Thank you. I may or may not be looking at a list.
Okay.
So, how did the Blues come to face the Bruins in the Cup final?
Well, when the NHL expanded from 6 to 12 teams for the 67-68 season, they put all 6 of the new teams in one division, which meant that one of them would get to the finals every year. And that was a big point of contention among other people because they said this is devaluing the Stanley Cup finals. And the St. Louis Blues got to the Stanley Cup finals 3 years in a row and proved the critics absolutely correct because they didn't win a game. They were swept in 1968 by Montreal 4 games straight. Montreal got them 4 games straight again in 1969, and Boston got them 4 games straight again in 1970, which prompted the league to move Chicago into the West Division for the next year, so this didn't happen again. And they also changed the format slightly so that 2 teams from the same division could play in the finals, but that wasn't the case in 68, 69, or 70. Nevertheless, St. Louis was the best of a bad bunch. They were clearly the best of the expansion teams, and they had a decent lineup. They had Red Berenson, Jim Roberts, Frank St. Marseille, Gary Sabrin. They had fairly good players, but they were getting old. Jean-Guy Talbot, one of the defensemen for the Blues, was playing in his 12th Stanley Cup final. That's almost like unbelievable if you think about that, because he was a mainstay with Montreal for many years.
Hey, it's more than Tom Brady.
Yeah. So the Blues were basically at the end of their chance to win the Stanley Cup. A lot of them said if we weren't going to win it this year, we're not going to win it at all, because all of a sudden, age starts to become a problem. And their goalies were Jacques Plante and Glenn Hall, like 2 Hall of Famers, but they were like 41 and 38. But they had won the Vezina Trophy the year before, I believe. So anyway, the Blues had decent goaltending. They had a decent team, good enough to be the best team in the West by far. And they had good coaching. Scotty Bowman was their coach long before he coached Montreal. And he played a good system. And he knew that he was outgunned against Boston. He tried to shadow Bobby Orr for the first game, as we mentioned earlier. It didn't work. And after a while, the Bruins just wore them down. The first game in St. Louis had home ice, believe it or not, in the finals because they finished first in their division and Boston finished second. That was what the criteria was for getting home ice advantage in the final. In the first game, St. Louis and Boston were playing fairly evenly at the end of the first period, and then Jacques Plante, the goalie, was knocked unconscious by Fred Stanfield took a slap shot. Phil Esposito tipped it and went up and hit Plante's face mask. And those are the days when the face masks were very form-fitting, and the shot actually cracked Plante's mask and knocked him unconscious for 3 minutes. He was hauled off the ice, never played another second the rest of the season, and actually never played another game for the St. Louis Blues again. And they replaced him with Ernie Wakely, who was not a great goalie, and the Bruins basically poured it on him and won the game 6-1. Glenn Hall, it was thought he would play Game 2, and he didn't play Game 2 for St. Louis, and it turned out that he had an infected hand, and he didn't play until Games 3 or 4. But the Blues actually put up a decent fight, but people realized that the real final was probably Boston and Chicago in the Eastern Division final, which Boston surprisingly won 4-0. So.
Right. I mean, they destroyed the Blackhawks in that series. It was a sweep. It was an absolute romp, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, the last game was Game 4 they won with a goal with 1:19 left by Johnny McKenzie, but the other 3 games they won fairly comfortably. Yeah.
Right. Just an interesting note on the 69-70 Blues. Just looking at the roster, you'd be surprised at the Islanders connections. Phil Goyette, first Islanders coach, Terry Crisp, original Islander, and Al Arbour, best coach in Islanders history. It's kind of weird how things like that work out.
I had never thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah.
See, only an Islanders fan would notice that.
Yeah. So, which actually indicates that these guys are a little bit long in the tooth because their playing careers were winding down, and a lot of them got into coaching. So.
Right. Well, Terry Crisp was a youngster, but even then, he wasn't that great. 11 points in 26 games that year. Talking to John Robertson, the author of Hockey's Wildest Season, The Changing of the Guard in the NHL, 1969 to 1970. And, John, I'll get you out on this. The famous moment from the 69-70 season, the Bobby Orr Stanley Cup winning goal, the picture that I have hanging up in my room, signed by him. I'm looking at it right now. What can you tell us about that goal, the series, the whole shebang? Let me hear.
All right. Bobby Orr won the Conn Smythe Trophy as the MVP of the playoffs in 1970, but he hadn't scored a goal in the finals until that goal. He had a lot of assists, but no goals. He got lots of goals against the Rangers in the quarterfinals and against the Blackhawks in the semifinals. And Scotty Bowman tried to shut him down by shadowing him with Jim Roberts for the first game and a half. And Orr was quite content to let that happen and let the other players shine. So going into Game 4, people expected this to be a rout because Boston won the first 3 games easily. I think the Bruins may have taken them a little bit lightly because I was reading some interviews and the players saying, "Oh yeah, we're going to win Sunday afternoon's game, no problem. It's a foregone conclusion." And the Blues played them tough, and the Blues had a lead until about 6 minutes to go, until Johnny Busick tied it. So the game went into overtime. And the interesting thing that people who follow the Bruins were kind of scratching their head at was who Harry Sinden put on the ice to start the overtime. He didn't put on the Esposito line. He put on the checking line, which was Derek Sanderson, Ed Westfall, and Wayne Carlton. And the defensemen were Don Ory and Bobby Orr. Harry Sinden figured, well, the Blues are going to put out their best line, so I'm going to neutralize it with the checking line and then go from there. So anyway, the overtime only lasted 40 seconds. The Blues won the face-off, and then Jean-Guy Talbot made a bad pass, and Orr intercepted the pass. The puck ended up in St. Louis's zone. Derek Sanderson took a wild shot, and Orr made a bit of a risky play. Orr was playing on the right point, and he came in and from inside the blue line to stop the puck from going out of the zone. Had the puck got by him, St. Louis would have had a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1, and Orr is the first to admit this. But he kept it in. Sanderson went behind the net just to the left of goalie Glenn Hall. Orr fed him a pass, and this was a play that the Bruins had practiced a lot in the practice sessions. Sanderson knew Orr would rush to the net, and Orr did. Sanderson hit him with a perfect pass in the slot, and Orr admits that he didn't actually aim his shot. He just put it towards the net, and Glenn Hall moved across, and he opened his legs. And the puck went right between his legs, hit the center of the net about a foot off the ice, and the famous picture of Orr flying through the air came not because of the goal, but immediately afterwards, Noel Picard, number 4 on St. Louis, for some inexplicable reason, tripped Orr after the play was over and then sent Orr sprawling. And then you have the famous picture by Ray Lucier that appeared all over papers in North America and is considered one of the great sports photographs of all time. And as you said, you probably have an autographed copy. I have a copy of it. Any hockey fan worth his salt has seen the picture. And it's an iconic NHL moment. It was actually voted the most iconic moment in NHL history a few years ago. And I don't think many people would dispute that because it's such a great photograph. It's such a great moment. It encapsulates the whole season. It encapsulates the joy of someone winning the Stanley Cup. And it's a tremendously great eye-catching photo, and it appeared on the front page of literally thousands of newspapers the next day.
And there's not a hockey fan alive that hasn't mimicked Dan Kelly's famous call of that goal. I'm sure you'd agree with that.
Yes, and the interesting part is there is no known copy of that game in its entirety. There are only snippets of that game that exist. One of the snippets happens to be Dan Kelly's call because it was preserved by a Boston TV station that replayed parts of the game as a highlight package the next week. Sadly, a lot of sports events from that time were taped over, and including apparently Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Final. And Dan Kelly's call has been heard since then, and it was only by happenstance that it was saved at all. So
you got to wonder why people taped over stuff like that. I mean, good God, don't they have a sense of history?
Apparently not, and it was for two reasons. Videotapes were very expensive, and they could use them over again, and they thought the cost of storing them was prohibitive. So there are a lot of sports events like this. There's apparently only one known copy of the first Super Bowl that survived.
Right.
Among other things. As late as there's virtually nothing from the 1972 Stanley Cup Final. The New York Rangers found a copy in their archives recently that they had shot themselves, but the CBS version is gone.
The full version of Don Larson's Perfect Game was considered lost for a long time. Then someone found it in like an attic or a basement or something like that. I mean, it's crazy how people didn't think to preserve things from back then. I'm sorry. It kind of upsets me in a weird way.
And a lot of the classic TV shows, Sid Caesar's TV show, there's almost nothing left of that from the 1950s. I Love Lucy exists because Lucille Ball was smart enough to film it and keep it for posterity. So too bad Lucy wasn't in charge of the NHL and Major League Baseball. Right?
That would have been nice. I wouldn't have minded that.
Yeah.
All right, John. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. Take care. That was John Robertson. His book is Hockey's Wildest Season, The Changing of the Guard in the NHL, 1969 to 1970. Thanks for listening. Here comes the outro.
Thanks for the plug, Jacob from the past. It does mean a lot. Until tomorrow, I am Jacob Valk saying that if the human body recognized agony and frustration, people would never run marathons, have babies, or play baseball.